Because at the time, like, what's wrong with me? Why am I so offensive, disgusting that they feel like they need to put me down? And you have no idea why would they be doing that. Now it's like, oh, it had nothing to do with me, and I wasn't that way.
Right. It wasn't that you were offensive or disgusting.
Right.
That is Rob Volpe, the guest for today's episode. In today's episode, you'll hear Rob share two stories. The first highlights the time when he was bullied by his classmates, and the second highlights the time when he starts attending a series of high school reunions, where he gets to know his former classmates at a deeper level. I hope you'll join me in holding space for Rob to reflect honestly. Welcome to the journey of realizing empathy.
I think we all have experienced a moment in our lives when we suddenly empathize with somebody we previously did not, by experiencing a moment of realization. One where we went, aha, oh, or maybe even burst out with laughter concerning something we either did not or had incorrectly assumed to understand and appreciate enough. While these realizations can sometimes be had in a few minutes, it can also take years. In fact, it may never happen. It is a seemingly simple yet complex and lifelong process of realizing empathy that I wish to explore in all of our episodes. Hey there, listener. My name is Slim. I help startup founders in their maturation as a leader and a CEO by helping them confront themselves in a true mirror. And I believe few things serve as a truer mirror than the challenges we face in our interactions with other people. The Journey of Realizing Empathy is a show where we explore how our challenges with other people can ultimately serve as a true mirror that helps us mature as leaders and human beings. In each of our episodes, we host a guest who tells a story of a time in their life when they struggled to empathize with one or more people until a series of realizations moved them to empathize with those very people. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Slim. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Would you be willing to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rob Volpe. I am the CEO and Chief Catalyst of Ignite 360, which is a consumer insights and strategy firm based in San Francisco, but we are a virtual company. So I have people all over, and we talk to people and listen and try to build empathy and help our clients have empathy with their consumers, and then understand how to actually use that in the work that they're doing to move things forward. And I also have the self-proclaimed title of empathy activist, if you look at my LinkedIn, which I would invite everybody to do, because I am a strong believer in empathy. It's core to who I am and how I move through the world, and I believe we need more of it. There's an empathy crisis that's going on, and the only way you can actually bring about change is to do something about it and be an activist. And it's not about marching in the street. It's small, subtle things that you can do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just want to start by acknowledging how much I personally appreciate you for coming on the show, because we live in a time where empathy has become a weaponized word in some cases. And it's not always easy to come on a show where we're going to talk about our own struggles with empathy. It would be far more fitting to say how much empathy we have, how amazing we are as people who have a lot of empathy. So a show like this, I believe, can not be easy for anybody to accept the invitation. So I personally really appreciate your willingness to accept the invitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I love that you're exploring it to this depth. Kudos for doing this. I think that's great.
Thank you. So before we begin, could you tell us what your relationship was with these people or person with whom you struggled to empathize at some point in your life?
Sure. One of the bigger pains, challenges in my life growing up, I was growing up in small town Indiana as a closeted gay youth. It's not even that I knew I was gay, but I was different. And coming from the outside, moving into this small town created a lot of challenges for me fitting in with the other kids.
From where to where?
My family's from the East Coast. So before that, I was living in New York City with my grandparents and my parents. And then my dad got a job and we were suddenly in Indiana. And then happy childhood until I was about 9 or 10. And then we moved to this other town. And that's when things took a big shift for me. And at that point in time, I was getting bullied. I was getting teased. Fortunately, I never had any physical altercations. But, you know, and again, this is starting in like 1980, so 40 years ago now. Yeah, into the 80s. And it was a different world. We didn't have Will and Grace. We didn't have Ellen. We didn't have a lot of the role models that are out there and the events that have made it more acceptable for people to accept gay youth and all of its forms. So for me, it was a really difficult time and I couldn't understand why somebody was picking on me.
So these were your childhood kind of peers? Classmates, yeah.
These were my classmates.
And you were how old?
This started in 5th grade, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. It got a little better in high school, but yeah, it ran for about 6 years. You know, it's one of those things, somebody had an older sibling that was in high school and so they knew all of the slang or knew the insults that were really going to burn. And he knew, I should just start telling everyone he's gay. And there are kids today that are aware enough, but back then it's like, what is gay? I had to go home and ask my parents, what's gay mean? And that's an awkward conversation to have. But
so they prompted you to talk to your parents about what gay means.
Yeah. I knew I was different. I knew I wasn't like all the other kids, but I didn't understand exactly in what way. And this was something that the kids picked up on, glommed onto. I don't think they really understood what it meant or that I actually was, but it was the put down at the time.
Got it.
And yeah, so it was really difficult for me to hear that and understand how to process that. And I'm a pacifist by nature. It's not in me to get into a physical fist fight. And that made it difficult because you get some advice about, you just need to go slug the kid that's doing it. And it's like, yeah, but that's not who I am. And it's so important to me to be true to myself.
Yes.
So challenging childhood. I mean, and you know, I've come to realize that everybody has their own experiences and some are truly horrific. And I'm grateful that mine was not that horrific, but you don't know that when you're going through it and you don't understand it, especially when you're that age. It was still difficult for me and being bullied and being teased and thought of and perceived as other. And I just wanted to fit in just like most people would. So went through all of that, had a lot of resentment and knew when I was leaving, I graduated from high school and I left, went to Syracuse. My family also moved away from Indiana, moved to the East Coast. And so I left and it was like, I can leave all of that behind me. But I always felt it was important to acknowledge that this is where I came from. And I think at first I had, when it was in my teens and 20s, of college and young adulthood, it was a sign of, this is what I've survived. I came out of this.
Yeah. And
surprise, I am actually from a small town in Indiana. Now it's just a reflection of who I am. I've got a lot of nice Midwestern values. So I don't have as much anger about it as I used to, and years of therapy and self-reflection can do that and help heal some of those wounds. But there were two kind of key moments as I've thought about this journey for myself and with my classmates. There are two events that have really probably transformed my thinking of my colleagues, or my classmates, I should say. And the first one was at our 5th year high school reunion.
Wow. This is like you going back.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What did you feel when you were about to go back? Because it might not have been an easy decision to do so.
No, that's a good question. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I was working in Hollywood, and some of my friends there, and I had just come out, I think, at that point. So some of my friends were like, are you crazy? Why would you do that? But I knew I needed to. And part of it was, to show people that I'd made it and that
Yes.
and it was like we had left. Like I left for college and never went back. So this is the first time I was going back there. But in the interim, I had heard stories. Like I was fortunate enough, I got to spend my junior year over in London studying, and an amazing life-changing experience. But apparently the rumor that was going around the town was that my boyfriend had broken up with me, and I was so distraught, I went over to Europe in order to get over it.
Wow.
Somebody still felt that they needed to concoct the story about me, who doesn't even live there anymore, hasn't seen any of them. This is before the time of Facebook. There's no connection, but still felt the need to make something like that up and share it. Wow. It was pretty ingrained, but I needed to go back because I needed to tell them, like, hey, I'm not.
Yes.
I'm working in Hollywood, and then, so there was a little bit of like showing them up a bit. I had made it.
I think that's very human.
Yeah, it definitely is. So at the reunion, I had a couple of people that I was still friends with from high school, and I kept in touch with. One of them is still a good friend to this day. So she was like my date, or we were each other's dates to the reunion. But while I was there, one of the guys said to me, he's like, I'm surprised you showed up. He's like, people are actually surprised that you're here. And I was like, why is that? And he said, we didn't treat you very well. And I was like, no, that's true. And he said, a lot of people are surprised that you turned around and came back and showed up.
You were willing to admit that very quickly.
One person was, yeah. One person acknowledged that to me. And for me, in that moment, it was like the checkered flag was waving at the Indianapolis 500. I definitely healed some of my own wound. Yeah. And I felt they were having some empathy with me.
Yes.
When I going, wow, we didn't treat him very well.
Right.
And so that felt really good. Continuing on through the years then, and I went back, I was in my 5th year. I think I went back to my 10th year reunion. And then I didn't go back until my 30th, which was 2017. It got really tough during the 2016 election, though, because it's still Indiana, and it is very red state. And there was a lot of pro other side that I was just really having difficulty accepting. And the dissonance that most people on the left are like, how can you let this person who's just so misogynistic, who lies all the time, who's racist, who's all of these things, how can you believe him? So I pulled back from some folks probably in 2015 and definitely 2016 and right after the election, but then went back to my reunion. At that reunion, I still continue to hear hey, great that you're here, know that we were shipped to you, which is really nice. And it takes a lot. When you think about what it takes for somebody who's been mean to somebody, even though we were all 10 or 12 years old at the time, but what does it take for you to actually say, they weren't saying I'm sorry, but they were at least acknowledging that they did it. And that meant a lot to me, that they at least were able to say that. And then we were at our reunion, and we're all in our late 40s at that point in time. We've lived at least half of our lives. We've lost some of our classmates, as happens. And I had this realization as I was chatting with people, because now we're the age, or a little older even, than our parents were when we were in high school. And so suddenly I'm looking at them and thinking about their parents, if I had met their parents, and it's all just coming together for me. The life that some of those people have lived, they haven't had the best opportunities. Some of them have, but it's life, and we're a cross section. It was a high school, and out of the 270 of us, some people become doctors, some people stay in a blue collar position, some have dreams that just don't come to fruition. And I had this realization about the wounds that we're all carrying with us, because you could see different scars that people had from their own childhood. And how'd
you come to this realization? Did you have stories that they told you, or?
It was listening to them talk about stories or hearing things about their families.
What were they sharing?
I can't remember specific things, but I would hear about the way their parents treated them.
How did they treat them?
Oh, neglectfully, verbally abusive, which they don't bring that to school. You don't know that.
Yeah.
I remember having breakfast with one of my classmates. It's interesting. There's a couple of guys that I've become, I would say, friends with that have reached out through social media.
Wait, a couple people that you became friends with who used to bully you?
No, they were never my bullies.
Okay.
They were never at that place. But both of them have actually reached out and also apologized and said, I know you were treated poorly, and I'm sorry if I did anything that hurt you or offended you. Anyway, one of the guys, we were having breakfast or brunch before the reunion, and he was telling me about what he was going through with, his dad, I think had been diagnosed with diabetes and had some serious illness, and I never knew about that. He never talked about it openly, at least in class. Like, we weren't buddies and hanging out, so I wouldn't have heard it directly, but you didn't know about that. And it's just all of those stories, and if you listen, you start to hear those things from everybody, because we're all age now, and so you've got enough distance that it's a little safer to reflect back on your childhood. You've worked out some of your shit. And so you're able to look back and go, oh, okay, yeah, this is what was happening.
What did you feel when you heard that person share the story of their father's diabetes?
I had some empathy. I had some sympathy, some compassion. I thought, wow, that would be really difficult. That would be really traumatizing to have. And his dad had gone through a critical stage or something in his illness at one point, and talking about that, and suicide came up in the conversation.
He was suicidal.
Not him, no.
Oh, the father.
Him.
Okay.
The father and others in the family. There's like mental illness issues. You're learning so much more about him. I felt honored that he was sharing, that he felt comfortable sharing all of that, and it just gave me a different perspective on why he was distant or why he behaved the way he did.
What was the contrast? Like, how did he behave back when he was a child?
There was a little bit of an aloofness or a distance.
Oh, I see.
It's like, yeah, it's a really good person, but they're not opening up. Open up a little bit more. And he's done a lot of that now as he's gone into adulthood.
So in some sense, you have a swath of people in your same class group, and you notice certain things about them that you wouldn't necessarily be able to explain or understand why, but 40 years down the road, now knowing exactly what was going on in their families, it was far easier to understand and appreciate, oh, if that was what was going on in their family, it doesn't not make sense that they would behave the way they behaved back when they were a child. That's a kind of a realization.
Yeah, and the way I've described it, and the aha I had that weekend was, oh, we're all wounded animals and we're all just bumping into each other. And that's what it was like in childhood. We all had our own shit. One of my friends, she had a difficult relationship with her mom. She was very close to her dad, though. And then when her dad died, how that impacted her adult life. And still having to deal, her mom's still alive, so having to deal with her mom, but where the tension was coming from and how that was then playing out in her own behavior and decisions she was making when she was a kid. Again, we're all just colliding into each other, or you're lashing out. And now it's like I realize them teasing me about me being gay had nothing to do with me. It had to do with what they were doing and what was happening for them and the wounds they were feeling and their hurt and their need to make themselves feel better by belittling somebody else.
What was that like to have that moment of realization for you?
It helped me access forgiveness, as well as just greater empathy for them. Through the empathy, I was able to get to the point of forgiveness because I was able to understand where they were coming from 40 years earlier, 30 years earlier.
So did that happen for a large portion of the people that you had collided with, or just those two?
Once I had that realization, it changed the way I looked on the whole experience. So I only built that connection with a couple of people, or had those moments with a few people, but the light bulb went off and I went, oh, I get it. And it enabled me to then, in my reflection on those times, look at it in a very different way. This wasn't about me. And that did a lot for some empathetic repair.
In some ways, even if you don't know the specifics of all the people that you collided with, those two prime examples helped you assume the best of intentions, and specifically soothing their own pain kind of intentions, as opposed to it being about you.
Exactly. Because at the time, it's like, what's wrong with me? Why am I so offensive, disgusting, that they feel like they need to put me down? And you have no idea, why would they be doing that? Now it's like, oh, it had nothing to do with me. And I wasn't that way.
It wasn't that you were offensive or disgusting.
Right. It was just, I was the wrong place at the wrong time for that particular town. So basically what I've done is, by building empathy with a few different people and having a deeper empathetic understanding, I'm able to apply it to a larger sort of cohort of folks. And again, there might be somebody that really did think I was offensive and disgusting, and that is what that is. The kid that started the whole thing, he's never shown up at any of the reunions. So
so he didn't. Okay.
Never had a chance to hear from him.
Wow.
And but it's okay. It's okay, because I understand now everything else, and I have this perspective on it that I'm like, it's fine. It's okay. I forgive him. I forgive them. We were all just, like I said, wounded animals bumping into each other out in the forest.
So that sort of sparked the work that you were doing now in the past 3 or so years?
I would say it was another stepping stone on my journey to understanding empathy and myself and how I do it. Trying to be empathetic and see the other person's point of view has always been important to me. And as I've gone through my career, the last 13 years or so that I've been working in consumer insights, it was probably back in 2012, 2013, I started to research empathy a bit more and go like, what is this all about? And there isn't a lot of consistency in the literature. There's a lot of different names that it's referred to. And a couple of years later, in that election 4 or 5 years ago, empathy was getting thrown around constantly by the pundits, the opinion writers, and news articles. So all of those things are happening. And that's happening before I go back to that 30th reunion. And then I go back there. And because I'm thinking empathetically so much more, it allows me to get to a place of empathy and have that. So the lesson from that is practicing empathy can help you be more empathetic and have greater breakthroughs about yourself.
So by the time 2016 or 17 came around, you've been, doing a lot of research on empathy already, building up your curiosity and interests. And so your whole, way of being is primed in such a way that to seek out, what is this empathy thing about? What can I learn from everybody that I meet about empathy that will feed into this research work that I'm doing? And it sounds like just at the right moment, this encounter with your friend and the kind of the in-depth stories that you were able to hear from them really became a catalyst, so to speak, for a kind of a profound realization for yourself. I mean, it sounds like it was very transformative in many different ways.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And working with my therapist and working through my own baggage and issues. But even through that process, we would have conversations around empathy or the nature of relationships and feeling safe and secure and cared for, and where empathetic repair comes in and all of those things. So yeah, it's been a great learning process for me.
How much do you credit the support that you got from whether it's your peers or your therapist or whoever, and being able to process the depth and difficulties of empathy over the past few years?
First, I've got to give credit to my parents. And I had the double whammy of getting teased for being gay, and I think I'm gay, And again, it's like the early 80s. That's not necessarily something you go home and tell mom and dad about. And in hindsight now, I've realized that I recognized instinctively that I needed to keep home as my safe space.
Yeah.
That was my safe harbor. And my parents created that. And I felt love and support from my folks and still to this day. And even after I did come out to them 15 years or 10, 12 years after that incident, or all of that started. So my parents definitely helped them. My parents, I do remember my dad constantly. My dad's very good about, you need to see from the other person's perspective or see from the other person's point of view.
Oh, is that part of values that he held for?
That was definitely a value that
he spoke about.
Yeah. And he didn't call it empathy, but he would talk about seeing somebody else's perspective, not in context to kids bullying. But yeah, that was definitely a value that my parents instilled in both my sister and I. And then as I went on, I was very fortunate in having mentors, or they're not all in that formal, you're my mentor, but influential people in my life. They were often bosses that were often women, but they were very accepting of me and nurturing and encouraging. And that helped make me feel more kind of accepted of myself. And then actually, once I left, got into college, I made friends and wasn't having an issue. I wasn't the most popular kid or anything, but I wasn't having an issue when I was at Syracuse. And then I moved and got to Hollywood, and I was making it on my own and lived in my own apartment. You build up your sort of self-confidence there as well. Yeah, and that allows you to navigate through everything. When you're leaving bullying behind, being bullied behind, and you don't have to go back to it. It becomes a compartmentalized, the wound is cauterized, at least. It's still there, but it's contained. I also then had to deal with coming out. And then from there, like finding a spouse and living my life. So the injury from childhood, for me, it has not been a constant in every day of my life that I'm consciously aware of. But it does pop up from time to time.
And I think it's really interesting and fascinating and also encouraging to witness somebody who was willing to go to their high school reunion, first of all. That courage was a major first step to a lot of these things, because it's not that immediately things will happen, but the fact that you were willing to have that chapter start, even though in many ways it lasted 40 years. And it fed into the transformative experience you had with empathy. So in some ways, it's quote unquote paid dividends, but really going back and marking that moment of courage when we need to prove something to somebody or show them. I think it's easy to put those things as some kind of a negative, but in my book, it's also a sign of courage, because it's a way of saying, I am who I am, and I'm not willing to back down. Yes, from like a literature perspective, you can frame it as, oh, that person is just trying to prove themselves and mock it. But it's a form of courage, if you ask me.
Thank you. I've never totally linked it to courage. As you're talking about it, I'm like, yes, that was a very courageous thing that I did, because I didn't know how the rest of my class was going to react. I knew.
No, of course not.
And I had a couple of friends. Like, look, my senior year of high school, I was the yearbook editor. I was selected the senior class speaker. I was in the drama club. I'd been on the swim team for 4 years. It wasn't that I was an ostracized outcast at that point, and I did manage to get myself into a place where I had some influence. The irony to me about me being selected as the yearbook editor and the senior class speaker, and even more the yearbook editor, it was like, and this is back at the time, I don't think I would have these thoughts now, but I was like, wow, I get to control the memories that everybody has of me. Because I get to produce the yearbook that they're always going to look at. And what do we want that to look like? And actually, the theme that my co-editor and I landed on was reading between the lines. And this is now 1986, 87, Breakfast Club had come out. So that was a huge influence on us. And the idea of we are more than what you see for us, and you look beyond the surface, read between the lines. So there were definitely some, I guess now I would look back at it as some like wink nods to, hey, what am I actually going to put in these pages? But I chose to be respectful. And obviously, like in the yearbook, I wasn't going to be able to turn it into a burn book or anything like that. It's still part of the school hierarchy and all. But even the senior class speech, I told the story of our class and hit the highlights and the low moments. We lost a student, at least one student, to suicide our sophomore year, other events that had happened, but did it in a very fun, reminiscent sort of way. Because, yeah, I had an axe to grind with some of the students behind me, but the audience in front of me, I didn't. And they didn't need to hear that. And it was either after the 5th or the 10th reunion, like the after reunion gathering was, again, this very Breakfast Club, Motley Crue assortment of me, my friend Karen, who's a psychologist, and then a couple other guys, 2 of whom were not particularly fond of me at the time in high school. But we were all out at some bar shooting pool until 2 a.m. or something. And it's been interesting, like who you end up connecting with and who ends up supporting you as an adult versus when you were a kid. So now I've come to realize that. And as you meet them as adults, it's like, you've got a really good heart. You're actually a really good person. And yeah, so yes, there was concern about what was going to happen, but this is where I came from. This is what I am made of. They talk about formative years. This was very formative, and I had a choice. I could ignore it, or I could accept it, embrace it in some way, and I chose to embrace it. And it has worked out for me.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you are able to look back and recognize the ramifications of the choice you made at that point in time. Number one, not an easy choice to have made, and who knows what might have happened. And thank goodness you were able to leverage this opportunity as a positive experience. And it's just so empowering, I think, in some ways, to hear a case where you made a choice to act on courage, not knowing exactly what's going to happen, but showing where you've come to is important enough that you're willing to risk that much. And then you start the first thread. And then the Hollywood version of the story would be like, immediately, as soon as it happened, all the flowers blossom and everything's hunky-dory. But in this case, I think the realistic version of the story is, and then 40 years go on. Exactly. And the sort of gradual progression of, I think that's another thing I personally appreciate about what you've done in your journey is that this wasn't a gimmick. It wasn't merely a one-time thing. It was something that you were willing to sustain.
Yeah, it's important to make the effort to try to resolve those issues, heal those wounds, have empathy, find the empathy, can make the connection, try to see the point of view of the other person. And that often means you've got to go face them and talk to them and hear them out. And whatever age you are and how far away that wound is, it's so important to work on it and address it, because otherwise you can go. I'm very fortunate. Both my grandmothers alive. One is 102, lives on her own in Long Island, Dynamo, still got all her facilities and everything. And she's never been able to heal that and move beyond it. And it's informed everything in her life and becomes such a big part of her personality and the way she responds to things. And that's fine. It is what it is. And I love her. But the point of that is don't wait. Don't wait until you're in your 80s or 90s to try to address something. Start today.
And I think in some ways it's easy to even weaponize words like choice. It's like, oh, you have a choice. But I think what you're saying is subtly different, is when there's a moment at which that choice becomes apparent and you're willingly making that choice because something about the circumstances in your life have aligned in just the right way that this is the time. And and for some people listening to this podcast, the moment they've heard your story, that may be the moment where they say, okay, enough is enough. This is the moment where I make the choice and I confront the thing that I've been putting off. Because I've been putting it off, and there's nothing wrong with putting things off because it's not the right time. But because I've heard this story right this moment, this has empowered me to make that choice. And for that, they can feel that sense of oomph, if you will.
Yeah, it is. It's about being present and having the sense of self and awareness of, okay, what is that thing that I might need to address? Or even as you're interacting, and it doesn't even have to be about healing an old wound. It's about the way you interact with somebody. Like the next time you're going to go off on a Trump supporter or you're going to go off on a liberal snowflake, recognize that you're being judgmental and see if you can dismantle the judgment and just listen to what they're trying to say and imagine what their point of view is. If people came out of this podcast with that understanding and in whichever facet of their life they tried to do, that would be huge. That would be huge.
And earlier you mentioned the difficulty of emotions, the E word, right? Yeah. From your personal experience, what made it difficult to access these emotional aspects of your experiences?
In order for me to really heal, I needed to access my own emotions around it. And that hurts, and there's tears, and thanks to my therapist, like there were some really great tools or activities that I could do to help repair that. The best decisions are made with a combination of the head and the heart. So you want to try to find the middle ground of that and not always be emotionally based, but not always stay up here in your head. And a lot of people like to cut themselves off at the neck and not access everything that's down in their heart and feel that. And I'm guilty of that too, because it's emotion. They're very powerful. They can take you in wild directions. And, you know, we're still battling cultural stereotypes of what emotion is, especially as men. Even though I'm a gay man, I'm still a man, and there's still old stereotypes of the way men are supposed to behave. They're not even old stereotypes, they still exist, like half of the country. I'm in San Francisco, so it's a little different. We're allowed to feel. But in some parts of the country, that is something that you save to express to your wife or not at all. So yeah, it can be very difficult to get down in there. But
what helped you in the beginning to start to venture into the E world of emotions? Because you said that you were also guilty of being a more cerebrally minded at first.
Oh, I was.
That could not have been an easy journey either.
I work with an energy healer, and we're constantly like, I go to my head, and some of that is a reaction to what happened when I was a kid growing up, where I was trying to make sense of it and figure it all out and like kind of work the angles. And then it became a survival skill. How do I behave? What do I say? What if I say this, what's going to happen? And how do I avoid rumors from getting started this week so that I can have a happy week at school? So I think I ended up as a coping mechanism a little higher up in my head. Then I was probably in better balance before all of that happened, and the sort of trauma of it drove me into my head a bit more. And so now it's like trying to find the equilibrium between the two, and the time when the heart can rule and the head, and when do they come together. But generally it's always there. It's just tapping into it or letting it express a little bit more.
How did you open that floodgate? Did you seek out an energy healer? Is that how that journey began?
That happened at the same time, within a week or two of me starting to see my therapist. I was having a little midlife crisis, I'll admit it, and needed some help. And a friend was working with this woman, the healer, and she was like, oh, you should go see Marie. And I was like, all right, I'll give that a try. And that's been just amazing. That's a whole other conversation. But the emotional piece has always been there. And I think it's been learning when to be aware of it and how to harness it appropriately or allow it to come out appropriately. So I can think about the guy that done me wrong when I was younger, and the heartache and the feelings around that, and how those emotions can drive you in a certain direction. I can think about moments of joy or frustration working in corporate America and the politics and the way things work there. And then, okay, so you're getting emotional at work. That's not really accepted. So how do you manage that? And how do you rationalize that? How do you turn that into an expression of your beliefs, but converted from emotion into cognitive sort of perspective?
So in some ways, like your personal noticing of your own ups and downs of emotions, and coupled with the constraint that at work, you can't just unleash that at will or at whim. You were in a situation where, okay, I need to do something about this in a constructive way so I can leverage this emotion instead of just ignoring as if it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's like allowing my passion to come through, and that passion can be very contagious, and it can help fuel charisma and make people follow along and oh yeah, he's really passionate about that. But it can be over the top passionate. It's balancing all of that out. So it's like, when do you use which emotion and in what way?
Did you at all receive feedback from anybody in your career that sort of sparked this kind of, oh, I need to do something about emotions? Or
Yeah, there was always an undercurrent of like caring too much.
So people will say you care too much.
Yeah, it wouldn't show up on a formal review, but maybe you'd hear something to that. But then the passion was really great, and it's what makes me, and the ideas come and flow. But I think it was also just my own realization of needing to manage that as well. Because you can see, again, if you're present and have awareness, you're looking around at how everybody's reacting. And if you're not influencing the way that you need to influence and achieve the results you want, then you need to think about what else you might have to do.
It's one of those places where I think it's easy to just blame other people. Oh, if only they would work harder, or if only they would be more passionate, just like me. That would be a kind of a typical inclination to react to those situations. But it sounds like you had a level of self-awareness where you said, well, if I wanted to be able to be effective in the work that I'm doing, I need to do something about me first, as opposed to just blaming or criticizing other people. Is that what happened?
Yeah, and it's happening in combination. Like, I can get mad at the division president all I want for not liking my idea, or start to learn, okay, when's the right time to position this? It's about understanding your audience and understanding context. Also then how hard to push, or when to say, okay, he said no, I'm just going to put this in the graveyard, but I can always dust it off. And there were a couple times where I was able to do that. And then, hey, I've got this in my back pocket. We can turn this on. We talked about it a while ago. And in a few cases that actually happened. And part of it too was like, corporate America may not be the place for me because I care too much. And it's not that people in corporate America don't care about their jobs, but the emotional side for me gets a little more invested in it. From there, I went to a small company, got laid off from that, started consulting, started this firm 10 years ago. Yeah. And I'm allowed to be enthusiastic about stuff and use it to, motivate the rest of the team or motivate the clients.
Yeah, if the person who actually leads doesn't really care, then like, why should I care? Kind of a thing also works into play.
Absolutely. If you're not seeing that commitment, and I think anybody listening to this, if you think about the job that you're in, you set the tone when you're at the top.
Yeah. It sounds like part of your journey really is a discovery of your own identity in a multitude of different ways. When you're in corporate America, you're constantly seeing the response to who you are. And in that journey, it sounds like you're striking a balance over and over and over again until you came to a point where it really made sense for you to start your own and channel as much of who you are into the work that you do, while also leveraging all the lessons you've learned up to that point about how to tame yourself at the same time. Is that how it summarizes?
Yes, I've not really described it quite that way, but I think there is, yes, layers upon layers of understanding yourself and who you are and what makes you happy and motivated. And then hopefully getting lucky enough to find that intersection of this is who I am, and then the job that's going to make me happy. Because even if I wasn't a workaholic, I'd still be working 8 hours a day, and that's half of my waking hours. And so you got to hopefully like what you're doing. What led me to go out on my own and start this company was a combination of they needed to make me an employee. I was a consultant, but I was working all the time for them. My own allergic reaction to the idea of being an employee. And so therefore, okay, what is it that I really need to be doing? And yeah, I had this really interesting moment when the opportunity came to launch the company. I was in my kitchen, which isn't that far away from here, looking at their contract, the employment contract. And I saw my name in the legal definition of my name and then employee in the parenthetical with quotation marks around it, all caps. And
Talk about triggering.
Oh my God. I don't think I read beyond the first paragraph. Like every fiber of my being started screaming out, no, this is not you. Do not do this. Like in that sort of tone and level of noise. And there was nobody else in the house at the time talking to me. But I was hearing it. And it's like, oh shit, I need to listen to this. I've got to do something about this. And that's then ultimately what led me down the path to start the company. Is like I listened.
Wait, so you just said no to the contract and said bye-bye or what?
I walked away from a very generous, I probably, and yes, I own a company, but there's a lot of ups and downs that go with that. I probably would have made more money if it was just about the money. At this point in time, I probably would have earned more money. It was an incredibly generous contract, but I couldn't get beyond the first or second paragraph of it. And, when your intuition is screaming at you, you've got to listen. You've got to listen. And there's something behind it. And you've got to understand, you got to tease the signal out from the noise. But this was like showing up in my toes and in my fingers, like it was everywhere. I would be afraid to know what would have happened if I ignored the universe in that case. It was such a strong signal. Oh God.
I think when you go do something that's quote unquote unproven or very new or very risky from the outset, I think many people assume it's calculated in some sense. It's very rational and all that stuff. But at the same time, there is an intuitive component that's hard to explain and hard to put into very concrete words and do a logical step-by-step analysis. But there is that intuitive component that just makes it undeniable that I have to do this. There is that sort of oomph. Does that resonate?
Oh, absolutely. It was like, okay, I've got to figure this out now. And there's a conviction and knowing. Right. And that's, I think, maybe that emotional, like just knowing deep down, like this is what I need to do. And whether you're an entrepreneur and you've seen an opportunity in the marketplace, or you've got an insight that I think there's a need, or in my case, it's I've got to go out on my own. I need to do my own thing.
Once again, the theme, perhaps, if you will, of the conversation today is this, like the ineffable. I would put a new word to it, because I think it's very easy for us to shun the E word to the side and judge it as like irrational and somehow judge it as bad. Mm-hmm. But I think emotion, in some ways, the way we're talking about here is this sort of ineffable quality that it's really hard to rationalize. Much later down the road, maybe 40 years down the road, when we write our autobiography, at that point, we can narrate it in whatever way we want and rationalize it after the fact. That's not the kind of thing we're talking about here. But at the time, there is this sort of ineffable quality but it's hard to rationalize, hard to justify, hard to logically explain. But at the same time, it's undeniable. Mm-hmm. And without that guidance, if you will, of that ineffable quality, I think we would just flounder. Like, I have no idea what to do. And the easier way out is, since I have no idea what to do, I'm just going to not do it. And then we just coast and coast and coast and coast. And I think in some ways, making the other choice is oftentimes very difficult because there are risks, there are uncertainties. Like every single one of the things we talked about, like you going to the high school reunion, are in some ways infused with this sort of hard to articulate quality where you made the choice to confront it, go forward with it, despite the risk, despite all those things. And it wasn't like a calculated like pros and cons analysis. It was just like, I don't know what's going to happen, but still I must do this. something is telling me that I must do this.
Yeah,
there's like very important points.
There's a deeper, and it is that emotional side and just knowing and sensing, and okay, what's really going on here? What do I need? When I made the decisions to go move across the country, start a company, change jobs, there's always a recognition of it's time, or this is the right thing to do. There's like a knowing.
And it seems to be very deeply tied with your sense of who you are. Because when you were talking about the first one, it's like, oh, I need to show them where I am and all those things. But the deeper root of that is, this is who I am. And I'm willing to own up to it because it's very important to me. And when you're making a decision about your career, it's also about something is screaming that this is not who I am. I don't know exactly who I am yet, but this isn't it. And I have an inkling of how I can find or be more of who I am than this. And I'm going to take that route.
Absolutely. And it just sparked a thought. I think about my like kind of superpowers of empathy, truth, and compassion. And it's no surprise that Wonder Woman is my like absolute. I still get really emotional when I hear the theme music, and it like brings up a lot of stuff.
Oh, the older version.
Oh, of course. I love the new version too, but the 70s TV show when I was 8, oh my God. I think this is living in the other town in Indiana, the first town, and my best friend, who is now gay, we both come out. We would play like Wonder Woman, Charlie's Angels, and Bionic Woman in the backyard.
Oh, Bionic Woman, that's right.
And be those characters. Like that was our role playing. And anyway, she's all about truth, and being true to yourself has always been important to me. And as you were talking about that, the thing that came to my mind was that when I was in school and I was getting teased, I think I may have actually said at one point, like, oh, I know I am, but I never denied being gay. When those kids teased me, I never said that I wasn't. I don't really think I said that I was. I think it slipped once, and then that fueled the fire, and I learned, oh, better not say that. But I never denied it. And so again, I knew deep down that what they were saying was true, which made it even worse. Because then it's, oh shit, what I am isn't something desirable.
Acceptable, yeah, exactly.
But I never denied. I was true to myself, and that's always been important to me. And coming out is all about being true to who you are and owning your truth. And watched a lot of Oprah in my he always talked about owning your truth and owning up to stuff. And I do that as much as I can and encourage it. But yeah, and I think, yes, that moment where I heard the message of, oh, I got to go start my own business, I'm not an employee, that was about me being true to myself. And that was the universe kind of, spirit or whoever, like going, hey, you got to be true to yourself. This is not you. This is so far off of you. Like, we need to get you back on course. And that's what happened.
And it also sounds, at least the friend that you mentioned about who confided in you and talked about his father and the situation that he was in as a child. In some ways, I think you being so unabashedly yourself and being the kind of person that you are, and in the presence of you for that person, may have empowered that person to feel secure and safe enough to talk about those things that he may not even dream of talking about with other people in the same reunion classmates cohort. Yeah. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. And there's this idea of like giving your power away, giving power to somebody else, and letting somebody use your truth against you. Because all of our truths are not like great, happy stories.
Sure.
It's all over the place. But if you let somebody else have power over you, instead of just own your truth, own your situation. If there's, so if you're the person that's on the receiving end and you're in a situation where you're talking to somebody and there's something there, they want to talk to you about it, just be there to listen. Just listen. And you can ask, and it's really easy. This is a trade secret I learned when I was moderating, and it has become like the easiest thing. And I tell everybody, when you're trying to ask a good question, just say to somebody, oh, tell me more about that. Because that invites them to just open up and share. Or another one is, how did that make you feel?
Mm.
And then you're getting into some of the more emotional kind of aspects. But we do so much self-focused validation and self-worth in social media, and it's me all the time. And we need to really get back to the us and listening to each other and asking each other good questions and listening, really listening.
Yeah. In some ways, it's very interesting that the kind of the loop that forms where the social media tries to be me, but the me that they're projecting is not the truth that we're owning up to ourselves.
It's a false front.
Isn't that ironic?
Hold on, let me adjust my mask.
Let me be the person that I believe I must be in order to be accepted.
Exactly.
So now you accept me. And if you don't accept me, like, shame on you for not accepting me, for not being who I am.
Yeah. There's a great book called The Velvet Rage that's all about what, in particular, I think you focused on gay men, and I think lesbians go through it as well. But what gay men go through in hiding when they're younger and they're in the closet, and there's stuff around the relationships are reversed to the mother and the father and what's supposed to happen. But what ends up happening is we create the facade. And it sits like 6 inches in front of us. And it's the facade that was the yearbook editor. And it's the facade that was the senior class speaker. It wasn't me. Because I wasn't out. I wasn't fully expressing me. I wasn't allowed to. And I had to create the facade. And that wiring goes really deep. So you end up compensating for that. And that's where a lot of addiction issues come into play, because when you do start to get validation, like all the validation, you imagine it's like it's stopping 6 feet in front of me, so I'm never feeling it. It's never sinking in.
Oh, I love the metaphor. Love the metaphor. Yeah.
Now, okay, I'm out and I'm an adult and I get compliments and I'm like, I don't understand how to handle it. And is it really even me? Like, I don't necessarily believe it, know how to accept it, internalize it, and it may still be the facade, because I may still be in the workplace putting up the facade, and that's what's getting validated.
Right.
And so then you end up not being validated and not feeling like you've got self-worth, and that leads to, I'm going to self-soothe by shopping, by having a lot of sex, by doing a lot of drugs, and then the Velvet Rage, it goes into all of those different, whether they're addictions or expressions, and why those are so prevalent.
Basically, any other extreme emotions that can mask the other ones that I don't want to feel.
Yeah, because I'm trying to make myself feel better. I'm trying to figure out how to penetrate that 6-inch, the barrier that's 6 inches away from me, and get into me and feel me and make myself feel good.
And I think it's one of those things where it's super difficult to do so because we're not comfortable in our own skin, because the moment we accept that's who we are, there is this possibility that we're not going to be accepted at all.
Right.
Now we're alone, screwed.
And then your worst fear from childhood when you were getting bullied is now played out. Like you really are ostracized.
Yeah.
And nobody wants that. You want to find a place where you fit in. Community.
Yeah. Community is such a powerful word. And I think earlier on, you credited your parents as being the first round of home, so to speak, and then having yet another circle. And I think these are very important infrastructure, as that sounds too mechanical, but support structures to have, because I think at least when I was growing up, there was this sort of prevalence of self-sufficiency. You got to stand alone and do it all yourself. And if you ask for help, oh my God, I'm not saying that you're weak, but you kind of are. Really? There is that unspoken stigma around not doing things yourself. Yeah. But the human condition in which that we live in, and evolutionarily many years down the road, though we might change, but at least at this particular juncture in history, there is this sort of deep innate interdependency that we cannot ignore. And I think there is something to accepting that part of our condition and being okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I can't remember the number. There are very few mammals that are truly lone, solitary creatures. I think there's very few animal species, animals in general that are and fit that. We are tribal. We're hardwired to connect and be with others and have our support networks. And for me, it started with my immediate family. It started with some influential people through work. My friends that I did have and that I made are very good, long-lasting friends, and they've been tremendous support. And you need that. You have to have that. And you have to foster it. You've got to work on it. It's been interesting with the pandemic and everybody's changing in their behavior. One of the things we've seen in our ongoing study about this is the change that people want, and they are looking for, when all of this is over, we asked, and 72% of respondents, adult Americans, 72% said they wanted some form of change in their life. They did not want things to go back to the way they were. And only 18% said they wanted things to go back. Now it's okay, we're moving forward. And then going deeper, like, what are those changes that you want? And there was a lot around gratitude and about the connections and the relationships that you have, spending more time with your friends, more time with your family, appreciating what you have, trying to see the point of view of other people. There's a realization that we need to do more of that. My personal hope is that one of the gifts from 2020 and everything that we've all been going through and all the different things that are going on is this enhanced sense of gratitude and being present and being in our moment and having empathy and realizing like we need to make some changes and listen to each other.
I think it's the cliche is we don't know what the value of something is until we lose it.
Yeah.
And in some ways, this sort of did that without completely losing it, thank goodness. One of the events that I attended during the pandemic was Death Over Dinner. And that was a really remarkable experience for me, talking about death way in advance, hopefully, fingers crossed. But it really, I think, forces you to stop taking anything for granted and really reevaluate how your value systems are functioning on your day-to-day behavioral and decision-making kind of levels. And I think what you're also saying to that gratitude is to that point where, oh, wow, it's not that I don't appreciate these things. It's just that I've become accustomed to it and became on autopilot where I took it for granted. Now that I've like temporarily lost it, I really see the value of it again. So until I temporarily lose it again, I'm going to rewire myself and be more conscious of the fact that these are really precious beings and things and situations that I'm in. And it really behooves me to acknowledge their value and their worth on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There is hope for us yet.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I understand that you have a book coming out. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Everyday Americans. I've just started working with our publisher, Page 2, tentatively slated for January 2022. And it's a look at my journey to understanding empathy and understanding the 5 steps and my own experiences, talking to everyday Americans, getting to go into their homes and the experiences that I had that maybe made me think more about what the steps are and the barriers that I had around empathy, the people that have inspired me, and also looking at how clients that were with me in the field, how they responded, and how I, in that go-between person, how do you figure out how to get the empathy established and keep it going? A lot of fun stories. You can imagine I get to go into the homes of people that you would normally not look twice at on the street. They're your friends, your family, your neighbors. And I've seen a lot of different things, from filthiest houses to stories that are just so inspirational and changes who I want to be as a person.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm grateful that in some ways that now you can share the story that you've gone through with a larger audience and inspire this one step forward.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Once again, thank you so much for your willingness to accept this invitation and your willingness to talk about it on a public forum like this. That's not something that I wish to take for granted, especially not at this day and age. How do you feel as we end our talk today?
Like I said, you've got to own your truth. And this is part of the journey for me, is sharing my story and owning my truth. And hopefully, if one person hearing this is able to think differently about empathy or act on something, that's amazing. What a gift. And it's that one little ripple, and what ripple will that bring, and go from there. So I feel great. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for doing that. May you stay beautiful, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you, Slim. Great to be here. Thank you.
Hey there, listener. Thank you for listening to the very end. I believe we can mature and innovate by navigating the difficult journey of realizing empathy in the face of tension. What I've learned from my own experience is that all of our challenges in empathizing with others is ultimately an opportunity to realize empathy with ourselves, to develop a greater understanding and appreciation of who we are and who we can be when we feel connected. And this journey is difficult. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is especially so if you go at it alone. So I envision a world where each and every one of us, from the moment we're born until the day we die, can feel certain there's at least one person we can reach out to at any given moment who can and will support us in this journey in a way that actually makes us feel supported. If you share this belief, please subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and also like and share this episode, as well as leave a review of our podcast so more people can enjoy it. And if you believe you know somebody who can be a great guest for our show, please send us email at podcast@realizingempathy.com. We absolutely love hearing from you. Thank you once again, and until next time, may you stay beautiful.